Welcome to another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. We're here in the Mercedes-Benz section of the garage. I used to work for Mercedes-Benz when I was in college. I was kind of an oil change, new car prep guy, so I've always felt a certain allegiance with the company. The hot Mercedes-Benz then, of course, was a 6.3. I finally went back and bought myself a 1971 6.3 with 300,000 miles on it. And we're going to put that modern 6.3 engine in it, but that's another story. We'll talk about that later. This is all Mercedes-Benz memorabilia. There's a very young Sterling Moss right there. I've been fortunate enough to get to know Sterling a little bit over the years. Just a wonderful, wonderful guy. There's Sterling Moss with the pre-production Gullwing right there. There's John Fitch. John Fitch, legendary American race car driver, won the Mille Miglia in the 1955 Mercedes-Benz Gullwing. And that's what the factory looked like after World War II. Within 7 years of that, they had these cars on the road, which is pretty amazing. And this is something I'm very proud of. I got a chance to know Fangio a little bit. This is his 1951 World Cup championship. Back in those days, they didn't give you $10 million to drive. You got a little cup, you got a handshake, a slice of cold mutton. Here you go, you're world champ, thank you very much. And that was it. But that's one of my most treasured items. I love that thing. I'm mentioning all this because this is the car we're talking about today, the 1955 Mercedes-Benz Gullwing. This is probably the most legendary Mercedes of all. This was the McLaren F1 of its day. They always call the Miura the first supercar, and I understand that. But this one, I think, certainly deserves that title as well. Introduced in 1954 at the International Auto Show in New York City, a man named Max Hoffman, who was a importer of European cars, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. He saw the race version of the Gullwing and said, you have to build a civilian version. Mercedes-Benz said, no, we can't take a chance. He said, I guarantee I'll buy them, all of them. And they built 1,400 of them, 1,100 of them came to the United States. The rest went around the world. In 1955, I think they built 867 of these, something like that. You know, it's interesting. This is a car I always liked, but for some reason I don't know why, I didn't think I'd like to drive it. It looked heavy to me. And I had an opportunity to buy this one. This was in a container out in the desert here in California. Had no engine, had no transmission. Stuff was missing. I thought, well, this would be an interesting project. And we got it together, and it is the most fantastic car to drive. It's about 2,800 pounds, very lightweight frame, a series of tubes, all welded together. I guess the Italians would call that Superleggera. Rolf Uhlenhardt, I believe, was the gentleman, the engineer behind this car. The racing rules at the time said you had to have doors that open, but they didn't say how you had to open. And because of the frame and the chassis coming up to here, you couldn't have conventional doors, so they put these doors in, which of course is now the iconic Mercedes-Benz Gullwing. As you can see, it was a race car. I'm only the third owner, but the fascinating part about it is it was never damaged, it was never hit, it never got in a bad shunt or a bad accident. The car, in 1971, when the previous owner bought it, it was an old sports car. He took it to Tony Nancy, a legendary hot rodder here in California, known for his hot rod interiors. He did all the fancy Deuce coupes and things you saw on hot rod magazines. And he did the interior. That's a Tony Nancy interior. And a man named Junior's House of Color. He was probably the most famous painter of hot rods and custom cars in Southern California. Still around today, actually, still working. He did it in this candy apple red. As you can see, sitting out in the dry climate in the desert, it cracked, and paint is falling off it. But you know something? It's fun to have a car like this. You can just go like this, you know. It's not some show queen that, oh, get away from that. You know, people want to sit on it for a minute, people want to rub up against it. It's not the end of the world. At some point, I will finish the restoration and restore it, but for now, it's wonderful just to drive it as an old sports car. Come on, let's take it next door and we'll take another look at it. What a wonderful car this is. It's pretty amazing. I never really appreciated how good these cars were. It had this wimpy gear shift sticking out of here, and I just thought, well, how fast can it be? What can it be like? It is an amazing car to drive. It was really a revelation how fantastic this car is. Let's go over some of the dashboard here. As I said, this car has not been restored. The one thing we did do, we pulled all the gauges out and cleaned up the faces on them. This, of course, is your tachometer, speedometer, fuel. You have oil pressure, water, oil pressure here, oil temperature, oil pressure there. And then, of course, you have your ammeter lights, turn signals up here, your light to let you know your enricher is on, fuel pump. Something odd, which is really different, is you have a horn button over here. You have it here as well, in case your passenger wants to beep the horn. I don't know what that's all about. And of course, you have your heater controls here, cigarette lighter here as well. Mechanical clock, you just kind of wind it. I like that actually, because you can turn off the power and you don't lose the clock. Let's take a look under the hood. The motor is back in for the first time in probably 30, 35 years. This thing was scattered to the four winds when we got it. 3-liter engine, what is it, 183 cubic inches, 220 horsepower, a direct gasoline fuel injection. First production car ever to have that, although that is commonplace now. It was really state-of-the-art back in the day. The engine is taken from the 300 series Mercedes-Benz. Notice how it's slanted on its side, so you can get a low hood here. Fuel filter there, air cleaner, radiator overflow. They got 220 horsepower out of it, pushing 2,700 pounds, which was quite a bit. We had the engine on the dyno, and it ran fine, but at high RPM, it was running lean. Isn't that right, Bernard?
It was going way lean.
Going way lean. What this has is, in the fuel diaphragm, what is it, lambskin? Is that what it's made of?
There's a lambskin diaphragm in there.
Lambskin diaphragm. You guys know what lambskin is used for. Well, it's also used now for a diaphragm in a Mercedes-Benz, and because the engine had been sitting for a long, long time, it had just deteriorated, and it was making the car run too lean. But it ran. And it would have been a situation where if we'd been out on the road and running it up to $4 grand or $5 grand, we probably would have melted a piston.
Yeah, it would have burned a hole.
Using the dyno, as you can see, so we're able to replace that diaphragm, get the engine running perfectly well, break it in, then put it back in the car. Unlike some Italian exotics, the German stuff, everything fits first time you get it. This is an exceptionally well-built automobile. You know, I had always heard about, you know, electrolysis, when you have steel fenders and aluminum pieces and metal touching metal and causing rust. I always thought that would be a problem with these. It's not with this one, probably because it was in the desert in a dry climate.
You know, all the pieces that we ordered for them, like you say, they all fit. We replaced all the oil hoses and the coolant hoses. And
the great thing about Mercedes-Benz is they have something called the Mercedes-Benz Classic Center. So if you have a Mercedes-Benz any year, every part is available, and it's a Mercedes-Benz part. It's not built by an aftermarket guy. For example, when I got this has finned brake drums, beautifully finned drum brakes, and a big chunk of the fin was broken off. We thought, well, let's just use our 3D printer. We'll make up a new piece. We'll fit it. It probably would have cost us $2 grand in machining time and everything.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're able to buy a new drum from Mercedes-Benz. They're not cheap, but it's cheaper than not getting it. I mean, you're not going to find that at a swap meet. The only other thing we did is they make a modern electronic ignition just for the sake of not getting stranded on the highway. And now you can go back to the stock ignition at any time. You know, guys that have these cars are real purists. They like them to be exactly as they left the factory. I'm not that fussy. I just like to drive it and use it. These tires also came from the Mercedes-Benz Classic Center. You won't find that size tire. They don't make it anymore. Well, Mercedes-Benz had them made up special. Let's see, do we have any trouble with the transmission at all?
Transmission was straightforward.
I think we ran MTL on that too, right?
Yep. The only other thing we did is we did the brakes on it.
Yeah, we did the brakes. You always want to do that. There are a number of people that can do the brakes. So these new wheel cylinders, new master cylinder, and stainless steel brake lines. Folding steering wheel, Bernard made a couple of pieces for that. You know, some guys take and put the wood steering wheels on them, the Nardis, and they're okay, but I love this. I mean, this is just that German precision. It clicks right in, and it makes egress, getting in and out of the car, just so much easier. And for a sports car from the 50s to have heating and ventilation that actually work, it can get a little toasty in the summer, but these windows pop out. In fact, that's the main reason they built the 300SL convertible model. So many people just, they thought it was just too much trouble having these gull wing doors. But in retrospect, The Gullwing is really the one everybody wants now. As you can see, not a lot of trunk space here. Full-size spare tire jack. 34-gallon gas tank. These are race cars, and they said they actually handle better when they had a full tank, but 34 gallons of fuel, that's quite a bit. Okay. Again, you don't want to be Britney Spears getting in this thing. You push that up and it snaps into place. Turn your key. Let me turn on my battery switch. Auxiliary fuel pump. This, of course, was the first production car ever to use fuel injection or gasoline fuel injection. This would be, what on a carbureted car would be a choke. And let's see what she's done. Fantastic sound. There are some cars you get in and they disappoint you. And then there are some cars you get in and they're exactly what you thought they would be like. And then there are some cars you get in that just amaze you. This is truly an amazing automobile. I like the fact that, with the exception of the steering wheel, nothing's plastic. All the switchgear is metal, and yet it's still a light car. Everything has a nice quality feel. You know, you turn on the lights, you hear a click. You know, I like it. It's like winding a mechanical watch. You know, you like hearing each little gear click in. And because of these Gullwing doors, you actually have a lot of elbow room here as well. You know, these were owned by Elvis Presley, had one, Sophia Loren had one, Frank Sinatra had one. All the cool people had a Mercedes Gullwing. Because this was the F1 of its day. There was really nothing as fast as this. When American cars could barely hit 100 miles an hour, this thing went 150 miles an hour. 150 was like 220 today. When I was a kid, I worked at Mercedes-Benz dealership in Boston. And we took one of these in 1969 or 70. We gave the guy $5,500 for it. 2 weeks later, we sold it for $7,500. We thought, well, that's it. Nobody will ever make that big a profit on one of these cars anymore. Well, now these things, my God, I think this will be one of the few post-war production cars to go to $1 million. Good ones now are $500,000, $600,000-$700,000. I was fortunate enough to get a good deal on this one because it had the engine, the transmission, everything was gone. And it sounds fantastic. Man. And the cool thing is, this car is modern car fast. It's amazing how stable it is. Don't forget, this thing was designed in the 50s, in the era of fins and glitz and chrome. It is so beautifully understated and so aerodynamic. You notice on the outside, even the door handles are flush. Nothing to interfere with the flow of air over the car. People wonder why they didn't put disc brakes on this car, why it didn't have a 5-speed. Well, this car was pretty expensive as it was. And those things were all just extra. You know, Mercedes-Benz like proven technology. Disc brakes were still fairly new in the early 50s, and these massive fin brake drums worked quite well. The 5-speed was just a little expensive. Hey, 150 miles an hour with a 4-speed, that's pretty good. Red line is about $6,000. Drive a modern car and there's so much electronics involved, you're not part of the automobile. This thing is very visceral. I wish Mercedes-Benz had not stopped making manual gearboxes. They do a nice job. This is a wonderful gear change. Now you gotta be careful with these swing axles. They can catch you going out. You know, if you go into a corner and you lift off the throttle halfway in, it'll snap and spin you around. This isn't a car I drive particularly hard. You don't beat on it. You can drive it swiftly and quickly, but I don't drive it harshly. And no, we're not going to do a burnout. I love the sound it makes on the overrun. The nice thing about this car is you've got normal ground clearance. You know, so many modern sports cars are so low, you're always scraping and ripping and breaking off splitters. You can hang the tail out a little bit. See that? You know, the reason this car didn't come with a radio, you didn't need one. It's very entertaining to drive. Engine smooth as silk, very pleasing exhaust note. It's amazing they got it so right first time out. The thing that really stands out about this car is the build quality. I mean, here it is, what, 55 years later, and this chassis is still as straight and true and strong as it ever was. No flexing, no creaks or rattles. I'd roll down the windows and say, see you next week, but the window doesn't roll down. See you next week.